I grew up in the ashes of the Soviet Union experiment, but they didn't have AI. They were just trying to like listen to everyone's phone calls. Now, the CCP or any other regime that cares to do this can listen in to everything that everyone is doing. They can root out any dissent or anything they don't like, and that's incredibly terrifying. This is the tightrope that we're walking, and we're kind of quickly moving, right? It's not slowing down. There's new AI innovations every week, and we need to be thoughtful about what is the path ahead.
Welcome to Velocity of Change, a Protocol Labs podcast where we explore frontier technologies with experts across a wide variety of domains. Our goal is to uncover unique insights for researchers, entrepreneurs, and investors by taking educated guesses about the future. I'm your host, Jonathan Schwartz, a founder and investor with a background in engineering and finance. On today's episode, we're going to examine societal design. This topic matters because societal design is the substrate where collaboration and innovation happen. As breakthroughs like AI accelerate, we have a rare window in time to rethink how we work, coordinate, and build together. That's why I'm speaking with Timour Kosters, co-founder of Edge City, a society incubator bringing together leading researchers and innovators across neurotech, longevity science, Web3, and more to prototype systems that advance human civilization. Join us as we discuss the past, present, and future of human coordination and society at large. Timour, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. Yeah. So goal for today is to speculate on the future of society and human coordination. A couple of weeks ago, we had that call where you said discussing the future of these topics would be helpful to kind of ground the conversation in a historical context. Would you mind giving us a few key events that come to mind for you that set the trajectory for discussing the future?
I think when I think about the past, I think there are like one of the key things that I think people don't realize is that there has been so much more experimentation in these structures that govern our society than we think. We have a very linear view of history that we went from, hunter-gatherers to, farm-based civilizations to, Middle Ages, Industrial Revolution, and then here we are now. But actually, if you read books like The Dawn of Everything, David Graeber, and the more recent research shows that even as those transitions were happening, people were experimenting with different politics, different ways of structuring society. Just different experiments. I'll give you one example. There's evidence now that there were kind of tribal societies that would have different political arrangements depending on the season. So in the winter, they would actually be quite authoritarian. They would nominate a chieftain who would lead them through the hard times. And then in the summer, they would actually go back to being a much more democratic society. And the protection against someone taking too much power in that authoritarian time is that when it came back to being more democratic, they would, potentially be punished and not have that ability the following time. There is evidence of like fully anarchist cities 6,000 years ago in kind of modern Ukraine and things like this that are just like so interesting to look at. And what I hope we can glean from some of these lessons is that we have the ability now to change the way that society functions. It's actually another great David Graeber quote, which is kind of the ultimate truth is that reality and society is what we shape it to be, and we actually have the agency to do that. Another kind of part of the lineage now, fast forwarding to, let's say, the modern era, that I think about is the period of the Enlightenment, which was really kind of philosophically centered in the UK and France, but in particular in France in 17th and 18th centuries. And it's interesting to look back at it now because so many of the things are so fundamental to our current society that they were talking about that it doesn't seem that novel or interesting, right? But at the time, the idea of having a non-monarchical state, the idea of human rights, the idea of kind of the foundational ideas of liberalism that we think about today were extremely new and novel, and they needed a place to actually incubate. And so you had these salons that were run usually by well-known intellectual women who would, in Paris, they would gather kind of the leading thinkers and doers and builders of the time in essentially homes in the evenings, and they would discuss the kind of foundational ideas. And so you had Voltaire and Rousseau and kind of all these, core thinkers that would go there and they would debate ideas like, eventually what became democracy and, the idea of a Bill of Rights and, the things that led to the French Revolution and then obviously influenced the American Revolution and so on. So what I glean from that is that it's important to always have places in society where we can momentarily retreat to and have a safe space to discuss what should come next and actually evaluate ideas about the current moment. And they can be temporary, right? Like these were not permanent fixtures. They were not universities. Like that thinking wasn't happening in the government or in the kind of growing private sector at the time, or in kind of mainstream academia. It had to happen in these, hidden environments almost. And then the third example I'll give, there are like even more contemporary examples now of things like Black Mountain College or the Santa Fe Institute. And these are examples where, again, like Black Mountain College was essentially like a new take on a university. It lasted about 30 years in the 20th century in the US. It influenced so much of American culture that came after it. Buckminster Fuller was there doing some of his foundational work. And it really, for many people, was, again, this temporary escape from their mainstream normal lives, that they could go somewhere and spend 3 months and actually go deep on their ideas and experiment with new concepts. The Santa Fe Institute is another example of this, where some of the scientists from the Manhattan Project set up this new institution to study what was at the time this kind of new field of complexity that eventually spawned chaos theory and what we now think of as complexity science. And again, for a lot of people, this was this kind of temporary intellectual escape where they could go and actually incubate new ways of thinking, new ways of, essentially new fields of academia. And so these are very different examples, but I like to reference them because I think it shows this lineage of creating spaces for new ideas and actually finding ways to take time away from the mainstream to think about and actually start to build, the potential future. And I think this is a very human thing. I think it's a very important thing. I don't think it's happening enough right now. I think a lot of the traditional areas of society where new ideas come from have become honestly quite traditional and, like academia, the private market, the public sector. And so this is what I'm now kind of spending my time doing, is creating those environments.
So cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I have so many questions. Well, one immediate question that comes to mind is kind of like a shots on net question. Like throughout history, of course, you named several examples of places where people can go to freely express different types of ideas and explore different models of innovation, coordination, and so on. When it comes to those ideas basically being brought out of those societies, or these like kind of pop-up imminent or ephemeral cities, you would say, how does that actually occur? Is that more of an organic thing that great ideas just spread, or do people in these cities become visionaries and it's more of like a crusades? Like we go and now we're trying to convince people that this is how we should be doing things.
Yeah. I think this is what's so interesting about memetics and memes and how ideas spread. I think ultimately good ideas can catch on. The idea of human liberty caught on, and it was introduced at the right time in the right place. It almost had to happen in, late 18th century France, where people were kind of primed and ready for the concept of actually a democracy and not being ruled by a king. And so I think what happens often is that a concept can be incubated many times around the world. It probably was incubated. Actually, okay, here's an interesting side note about the idea of democracy. The Dawn of Everything, this book I mentioned, has this very interesting theory, which is that actually those core ideas came from the Jesuit missionaries who had gone to what is now the US, who had gone to North America and actually spent time with the native tribes, trying to convert them to Christianity. And so the Jesuits were talking about life in, the monarchy of France to the tribes people. And the tribes people were saying, well, that doesn't sound very good. So you have this authoritarian structure where someone's always telling you what to do. How is that better than what we have? We have this free democratic environment where, no one is being coerced into doing anything. And the missionaries say, no, this is civilization. This is the state. They wouldn't have referred to it as a state at that time, but essentially, the thing at the time that existed like that. And what's interesting is what happened was that the Jesuits wrote up their experiences, and they would often frame the conversations they were having with the with the Native American folks as, isn't it so crazy with these ideas that these people have about women and men being equal and them having a vote and who the leader should be and all that stuff. But really, it seems like from the text, they actually kind of agreed with it, but they needed to frame it in a way that would get printed in France. And so these, in the early 1700s, these were some of the most widely read texts in Europe, were these tales from the New World, where like, these savages, how are they living? And there's evidence that actually Rousseau was very inspired by some of these things. And actually that just stated the early ideas of, what if society was actually structured like this? So it's one of history's kind of great ironies that actually the things that led to the Enlightenment and what we think of this as like this great leap in Western thought actually came from Native American tribes, right? Wow. So it's just an example of how ideas can spread, ideas can gestate in the place where they need to in order to actually grow from being a tiny seed to a seedling and eventually a growing, beautiful tree. And then we, as essentially the birds and the bees who take these concepts and spread them around, might bring them to a new area where actually they can be even more impactful because they just like catch fire at the exact right time and place. So to answer your question specifically, it happens in all kinds of different ways. And I'm very interested in the grounds up, the community first approach, because I care about the emergence of good ideas and then actually creating spaces where those early seedlings don't just instantly get trampled on, right? A lot of good ideas start out looking really bad.
Totally.
And so we don't want kind of the early forms of what could be the next social contract, could be the next way of educating our youth, to just instantly be said, no, that sucks. That's terrible. That's not going to get traction. That's not going to raise money. That's not going to be supported by the government or whatever. It's like, well, let's just incubate it and see how it goes, So again, to tie it back to Edge City, this is somewhat what we're in the process of trying to do, right? Try and create the Enlightenment salon so that when that next cool idea comes, it can actually grow.
It's really cool. Yeah. It's like the image that comes to my head is just like a petri dish for humans, know, and it you have all this emergent behavior and it's very like open-minded and a very like scientific approach towards finding like the truth in what might be a good idea, right? You have to let things build a little bit. In a era of globalization and where news can freely travel instantaneously and where the narrative of certain things and the history of certain periods of time can be awfully biased or swayed. How does actually having what you would perceive as good information about a different tribe or a different culture influence our ability to draw inspiration from it? Does that make sense? Like, I find a lot of times we may hear propaganda that props up our own nation by putting down a different nation. Yeah. And they do bad things and we do good things. When in reality, it's maybe not that clear, right? And do you think that interferes with people's ability to be open-minded and accepting cultural elements from those other places?
100%. Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is kind of the reality of the moment that we're living in right now, right? We've had the last 30 years of like globalization, neoliberal trade policies, let's just connect everything and everyone. And now it seems like we're starting to turn into a more isolationist, politics, and countries starting to go much more internal, starting to kind of build up barriers. Obviously, this is led primarily by the US right now, but I think it's generally a thing that's happening across the board. I think the information environment is a critical part of that. It's something that we need to be very thoughtful of. It's interesting to me, having now lived in Russia, Ukraine, the UK, US, and now spending more time in Berlin, I kind of keep an eye on the different news sources just to get a sense of, what does propaganda look like? And this might be news to some folks who are listening in the US, but like, we have just as much propaganda here as there are in other places. It's different. It's a bit more subtle. There are more varieties of things you can say, obviously, but it has like a certain tint to it that's important 100%. To be aware of. I think ultimately, and I imagine we'll get into this topic more, but like for me, nation states, I hope will slowly start to lose relevance as something that people attach their identity to. And I don't want it to go away entirely. I'm not one of the, libertarian, burn it all down, get rid of the Westphalian nation states and just like, let's move on to the next thing. I don't think that's the right answer. I just think that people hopefully will start to care less about where they're from and will start to care more about the groups of affinity that they belong to. So there are people in Asia, there are people in China and Japan, there's people in Africa who I just relate more to. I feel closer to them than the person I literally live next door to in my apartment in New York or Berlin, right?
I feel that.
And that's really cool that we live in a world that allows for that, this world of just instant communication and also just travel, right? Like nomadism is back on the menu, right? It used to be how we lived for a long time. Then we had this weird period of like, the story of the nation state being the most important thing. And now we're traveling again. And obviously there's privilege in being able to do that, but like that's becoming more and more accessible. And so, yeah, it actually makes me really sad when people start to, there's race-based violence in the US based on what someone reads about China and et cetera. And it's just like, we're better than this. Like we can move beyond this, right?
Yeah.
Like I understand that there are national interests. I understand if people care about their fellow country people, but hopefully we can kind of evolve beyond this weird tribalism that's got stuck at that nation state level, and move
100%.
more into a world of plurality, which we can touch on.
Absolutely. Yeah. A lot to go there. Foreshadowing a lot of topics.
Yeah.
One is definitely, the role of allegiance in society, the role of the average level of education of a like citizen in a society.
Yeah.
Those are things we'll definitely get to. I'm curious from a historical lens too, what is the role of new technology in enabling new types of coordination?
I think it's pivotal, right? It's just like every time the technology tree progresses, there is some big event that comes afterwards. And especially with technology of communication, usually there is a big player that is able to take full advantage of the new technology, or some series of events happens. So for example, Gutenberg printing press, not long after you get the Reformation, you get, Protestantism rising, it spreads through leaflets. It's kind of the first like viral meme. Then you get the 30 Years' War, like the most destructive conflict in Europe until, the World Wars. And that leads to the Treaty of Westphalia and kind of the nation state that we have today, right? So there's just like a pretty clear arc of how that technology influenced what came after it. Another example is the radio, right? Radio is developed, instantly used to just incredible effect by the Third Reich, by Goebbels. They turned the radio into this incredible tool of propaganda to spread their message. That's part of how they are able to get into power and to do, the evil that they did. The Allies used it too. Eventually, they caught up. You had Churchill's speeches being, distributed. They started to use television and, things like this. And then more contemporary examples, like when Facebook was first starting out, it was such a cool and beautiful idea. And then even by like 2012, when it was a core function of the Arab Spring, no one really thought of it as like a political tool. The idea back then that like the 2024 election would be pretty much decided by whose podcast did the candidate go on and did it go viral, or like who is able to like post on Twitter and, even back then, as the Arab Spring was happening, people didn't really conceive of this, right? But you can see now in retrospect that like, oh, right, this new technology actually enabled this incredible wellspring of activity, or even Occupy Wall Street and things like this. So yeah, pretty much every time we get a forward leap in ability, every time we expand the adjacent possible, you get some big important thing that occurs because of it. And usually it's emergent, which means it's very difficult to predict, right? And I think the idea of emergence, the idea of complexity is incredibly important, especially as we start to think about, okay, well, what impact will AI have? What impact will agents have, et cetera?
It's so interesting. And so it sounds like generally would it be wrong to say you feel like technology has had a net good effect on society development? Or do you feel like, I mean, of course there's danger as well, right? Like even something like fire, right? Like that's probably one of the earliest technologies, if not the first.
Right.
And it's used to cook meat, which has really helped humanity develop. It's also used to kill a lot of people. How do you grapple with introducing new technology, both the good and the bad?
I mean, I think that this is a very complicated question.
It's really hard.
Okay, so I'll say a couple of things. One, there is this idea that technology is neutral, right? There's like some tweet that went viral. It's like, you can't say technology is good or bad. Is steel good or bad? And I totally agree with that to some extent, right? I don't think it's my place to litigate fire and see like, was it like net positive or not? I think without fire, like I wouldn't be alive right now. Probably none of us would, Yeah. So like that, it's cool from that perspective. I think thinking about, so coming to a more like less theoretical and a more like applied philosophy now towards this topic, what can we say? I think one thing we can say is that probably the two sides of the spectrum are not correct, in the sense that, you have this kind of like full send, all gas, no brakes, techno optimism. Let's just, accelerate, don't care about anything, just YOLO, make money, and that's it. And I think that's like pretty clearly not the right answer, because there are bad things you can create. There are second order effects. Again, Facebook was this incredible thing when it first started. And then, you have teen suicide epidemic, you have, genocide in Southeast Asia. All these things are like pretty clearly linked to the algorithm and the decisions they made to prioritize virality and time on platform.
Totally.
So great, we have a ton more depression, but we're all like way more connected in the world. So that's, how do you weigh that? I don't know,
Yeah.
So again, but again, the other side of the spectrum of like the Luddites, burn it all down or stop everything, at least bomb the data centers, stop everything, is just not, also probably not the right thing, because I do think where we are now, technology is probably the only thing that can save us from the problems that we have. And so we need to encourage more innovation, more science, more thinking, tools like AI that can help science happen faster, obviously renewable energy and things like this, robotics, even going to space. Like, I'm all for rockets, robots, and flying cars. I just think we need to be thoughtful. And so what are the ways that we can be thoughtful? What are the philosophies that we can introduce to this? There are two that I really like. One is the idea of DACK from Vitalik Buterin, which I can break down and talk about at length. And then the other one is the idea of plurality, which is an idea from Glenn Weil and Audrey Tang.
Yeah, give us the high level gist.
Okay, so DACK is an idea that Vitalik wrote about in an essay called My Techno-Optimism. It stands for Decentralized and Democratic Differential Defensive Technology. I call it jokingly 4D tech because it has 4Ds and it's like playing 4D chess, but it's DACK. We don't need more, acronyms. So essentially, defensive accelerationism. Let's accelerate technology, but let's be thoughtful about what we accelerate and what we develop. And let's create technology that favors the defensive stance versus the offensive. He breaks it down into the world of atoms and the world of bits. In the world of atoms, physical IRL life, there are things that we can develop that will ensure the survival and prosperity of humanity, like disease-resistant crops, rapid pandemic response, biosecurity, things like that. Things that actually, if AI comes around and makes it really easy for anyone to develop a bio super weapon, let's actually create the technology now that will allow us to defend against that. In the world of bits, defensive technology can be things like cybersecurity, obviously, which we need to develop more of to make sure, we don't all get hacked again by adversaries or by some super powerful AI in the future. But there's also things like info defense. Like, how do we actually make sure that we have clear epistemics? We get, we find a way to get to the truth. What is actually happening in the world? How do we make sure we're not just stuck in these like propaganda echo chambers? It's things like community notes on Twitter where you actually get people to, if someone says something that's incorrect, people actually call them out. And what's cool about community notes is that it doesn't really care whether it's like left-leaning, right-leaning, up and down. It's everyone gets community noted, including advertisers on Twitter who sometimes they're just shilling straight scams and people community note them. And obviously advertisers are like not too jazzed about that, but it's actually a really important part of information defense, right? So the key insight is Vitalik talks about the analogy to Switzerland. Like, Switzerland is this incredible model society, right? Incredible governance systems. It's developed such a good way of life. It's famously the country where no one knows who the president is because no one cares. And so people there are just like thriving, like loving life. How did Switzerland get like that and not somewhere else? Well, it came installed with this defensive shield of the Alps around it, where no one's been able to invade it for hundreds of years. And they've been able to develop this, thoughtful, thriving society. Whereas if you compare that to the Eurasian steppes where I'm from, like Russia, Mongolia, China, it's just a big swath of flat land. And it has just been invaded by warlords and, antagonistic empires. And there you just have more of this authoritarian strongman leadership regimes time and time again throughout history. Because, they say about Russia, it hopefully not, but it might never be a democracy because it needs someone in that leadership role,
That is so interesting.
Yeah.
How the land governs the things that...
It's like the destiny of geography. It completely impacts. Why is the US thriving? It just has no enemies anywhere near it and has two massive oceans defending it from like anyone that might actually want to come and mess with it. You can take that analogy and bring it over to just, the world and our governance systems in general, and think about what are technologies that we can create that build the defensive shield against some kind of attack in the future. So I see crypto and cryptography more broadly as like a squarely defensive DACK technology, because crypto ultimately is creating all the things that we care about in society, like money system, governance, et cetera, what you're working on in DeFi, but without intermediaries, without a middleman, without someone that can come and just decide to turn it off, right? And in the West, it's cool. It's really nice. It's a nice to have for sure. I think it's fascinating. But there are parts of the world where it's actually a necessity. Like you actually need it. If you are fleeing Ukraine from Russian attacks, it's actually an incredible thing to be able to put your entire net worth into, a wallet that you can take with you, that you have the private key to, that you don't need to worry about your bank getting shut down by, this attacking force that might actually just run your country tomorrow, right? So crypto, we're developing technology that's actually saving us from, or could potentially save us from, some kind of authoritarian takeover. And there are parts of the world where that actually exists.
One question for you here, which is, to preface this question, I am an advocate of privacy, encryption, a lot of this defensive tech that you talk about. How do you actually classify something as defensive? Because couldn't you also reframe and reuse that technology as an offensive, right? Like terrorists using censorship resistance. Is defensive objective?
I think it's definitely subjective to a degree. And obviously we have to be thoughtful about these things. But if we worried about anything that we invent being used by bad actors just from the beginning, then we just wouldn't invent anything, right? We wouldn't have invented steel, because what if terrorists use steel, So I think technologies that protect human liberties, like privacy, like the ability to voice one's opinion without getting, a knock in the middle of the night, I think are fundamentally net good. And that's something we should focus on. Now, you might say, okay, there's obviously subjectivity in this entire field. I think there is a clear difference between clearly offensive technologies and something defensive. In crypto is a very adversarial environment. So it's actually amazing that we have this live ecosystem where there's billions of dollars that at any moment could be under attack, and people have just had to iterate and figure out how to keep it safe. So the cybersecurity, the cryptography that keeps that safe is just fundamentally different to like a bio super weapon, right? They're very different categories of technology. So I think you can actually quite clearly separate what you want to work on. There's gray areas, obviously, like drones can be used to defend against, again, like Russian invasion by Ukrainians, or they can be used to, for terrorist attacks. Totally understand. But I think there is like a clear line. And if you really want to be on one side of it, you can.
Ignoring technology, good or bad, first, it's helpful to examine just being static and not innovating and creating new technologies. And actually, I think that's a pretty clear, like you've identified too. I think being static, we would all end up dying. So you actually, in innovating, I think we've also kind of agreed it's almost net neutral. You can't say that a technology is good or bad, but advancement in general is better, even in its neutrality, than static, which to me is actually bad. So like, you don't have to necessarily make the argument that it's good, but it's better than the alternatives.
I do believe that technology is just the most interesting thing to me philosophically, ideologically. And I think that tech more broadly is good. It is the solution to many problems that we have. And it is the potential solution to the future problems that are, coming at us real quick. At the same time, I don't think that we can just, absolve ourselves of any type of philosophy, right? I think it's actually quite worrying that AGI is about to be born into the current, milieu of like, incentives, like the current incentive structure, doesn't seem like it's necessarily aligned with the creation of technology for human flourishing. It seems like it's aligned with, it's just kind of an arms race to get there as quickly as possible so that the companies can beat their competitors and they can be the ones to get really rich, or that the US can beat China and they can be the ones to defend their interests in whatever capacity.
I almost feel like we have this notion of like humans invent technology, but when you zoom out further, nature creates technology in a lot of ways, right?
Totally.
Like the whole process of evolution is technology. 100%. And I almost feel like technology is in some ways nature's wisdom. It's just a continuation of evolution. And what our job should be is more positive mimetics, right? Like in our movies and our media, especially in the West, we portray really dark futures, like The Matrix, which becomes really like dark. And you look at people, like we were talking about this the other day, and I have a huge amount of respect for people experimenting, like, but just bringing up Brian Johnson, like, yeah. I think Brian Johnson would literally like sign up for a Matrix-like society where he's uploaded his consciousness and his body is frozen and he's going to live forever in that state.
Right.
And it's like, how do we invoke more positive sci-fi ultimately
100%
in order to affect the evolution of these things into a better direction?
I mean, sci-fi is deterministic in many ways, right? Because people grow up, they read the books. The people that are nerdy enough to get really into sci-fi are usually the ones who end up inventing the future. I read sci-fi my entire childhood. And it's interesting because, yeah, someone put a website together of just like all of the big sci-fi, books and movies, all of the technologies in them, and then all of the startups that are doing all of those things. And it's kind of like one-to-one mapping. Like, and eventually we'll get to whatever teleportation, hopefully. But yeah, so sci-fi is deterministic. We need good sci-fi. We need more optimistic stories about what the future could be. Dystopianism is instantly compelling for the same reason that the YouTube algorithm slowly, moves you towards outrage and therefore can actually radicalize people in ways that they didn't feel when they first started watching YouTube. This has been shown. I think it's a similar thing. There's kind of like a human nature thing towards like wanting to see what happens in the dystopia, Yeah. So we need more like optimistic stories and sci-fi. And I think that's something that Edge City will hopefully have something to do with. We're having like a sci-fi writers meetup at our upcoming pop-up. The other thing to note about technological invention is that it also is, I think, in accordance with this kind of natural human desire to explore, to seek the frontier, to try new things, to innovate. And I think one can have a view, a moral view on whether certain things are good or bad, but one should also keep in mind just what is natural and what people will always do all the time. I think there are ways in which we are actually evolving beyond our, natural ways of being. Like we don't kill each other. We're not like extremely violent. There are ways that we've thoughtfully moved beyond our kind of natural way of man, which is good. That's very much a good thing. But I think there are things that are core to us that it would take so much work to just beat out of us this desire to like innovate and explore. And like, why would we, right?
Yeah.
And again, there's going to be plenty of problems caused by technology that we'll need to deal with, but there's also, it's probably the only solution we have to like the big crises that we need to solve. So I think this actually leads really well into plurality.
Perfect.
Because there's a book called Plurality by Glenn Weil and Audrey Tang. Glenn is an amazing economist. He invented quadratic funding with Vitalik and Zoe Hitzig. Audrey Tang is the ex-digital minister of Taiwan. She, I think, is the youngest minister in Taiwan's history. And she got the job by being such a good white hat hacker, essentially hacking the government website and making it work way better for everyone, that they just hired her.
It's amazing.
Right after that, yeah. The core idea, like the problem statement that motivates the book and this growing movement is, as we look to the future, we are kind of in this very narrow tunnel between, let's say, conflict and outrage on the one side and just strong authoritarianism on the other. So they talk about the antagonistic relationship between democracy and technology, right? On the one hand, technology is causing polarization, outrage. People are in their algorithms, in their siloed feeds, and they're just absolutely livid at what the other side is doing, whatever that is. And that is incredible for the shareholders of the social media companies that these people spend time on, but it's probably a net bad for society, right? So that's on the one hand. We have technology causing that, and that seems to be starting to unravel the democracy that we've spent so much time building. On the other side, technology like AI is kind of perfect for authoritarian regimes, right? I grew up in the ashes of the Soviet Union experiment, so I've seen how terrible all that can go. But they didn't have AI. They were just trying to listen to everyone's phone calls and keep an eye, and they had people police on each other. Now, the CCP or any other regime that cares to do this can listen in to everything that everyone is doing on the internet. They can probably listen into phone calls. They can root out any dissent or anything they don't like pretty much at will. And that's incredibly terrifying, because now you can, obviously you can live a good, flourishing life in China right now, but it's still not a free society. And let's say that the leadership changes and suddenly you get another Mao who just has crazy ideas about great leaps forward that his country should do, and then suddenly 35 million dead, right? So this is the tightrope that we're walking, and we're kind of quickly moving, right? It's not slowing down. There's new AI innovations every week, and we need to be thoughtful about what is the path ahead. And so plurality is the idea that they put forward, which is essentially the idea that we should use technological advances to actually uplift democratic processes and use AI, use the latest, tools from crypto to actually give people and communities more agency and more power and more ability to govern the things that rule their lives, whether it's their nation state or their local housing association or the union that they belong to, or the guild of professionals that they're a part of, And so this to me is extremely exciting, because I think, again, something that used to be a thing, and then we had the blip of modernity, and then now it's no longer a thing, is the idea of civil society and people being able to actually do things for themselves. People had, in the US 200 years ago, Tocqueville came and wrote about democracy in America and talked about how all of the associations and the church groups and the clubs and the guilds that people were part of were training wheels for democracy. They were ways that people actually engaged in governance over their lives, right? And then that civil society, right? We had the state, we had a growing private market, corporate interests at the time, and then we had the secret third thing, which was actually not so secret, is incredibly important for people, civil society. That just got eroded over the last 200 years, partially by the state, partially by corporate interests, right? And now it's what do you belong to? What community do you belong to that has any kind of collective power that's not, you rely on the government for some stuff. You probably rely mostly on private companies and corporate interests for most of your life. But what community do you have? What group are you a part of? What shared resource do you have some governance say in,
That's so interesting.
And so what got me excited about crypto is that I felt we have a new toolkit for a growing civil society. We have toolkits that people can use to organize themselves, that they don't have to rely on the state or some corporation, right? They can actually band together and do things together. And that's the core idea of plurality, at least the way I see it.
Oh man, we really could have the 7-hour podcast. I think I want to keep digging into that, but we have a lot of other topics to cover. So I think we'll put a pin in plurality, but it's quite interesting, and we can link to it in the show notes. Folks can read it and drop feedback, and maybe have a follow up conversation at some point on it. To sum up a little bit of the conversation here, I think we've talked a lot about the past, the history, also a lot of like present philosophy, a little bit of like hypotheticals. Yeah. Now I want to jump more towards thinking about the future. Cool. And what I've done here is prepared various factors. And I want to kind of introduce an angle when we think about society in general and like future living, human coordination, and discuss how you think about those factors when designing a society or experiments within future societies. Okay, cool. Okay. So, and I had a lot, and we were prepping yesterday, and they made me take out like half of it. So yeah. Okay, good. So this is the best of the best. This is I think so. So the first one here is about competition versus collaboration within a society, and also externally among other societies. Let's make some type of assumption that the society norms that we have today are going to change somehow. Okay. And now we're living in the future, and we're discussing what is the role of these factors in the future society we live in, hypothetically. So I think within the society context, I care a lot about emergence and the evolution of ideas. So I think competition is actually just fundamentally important in that process. Like capitalism is just an incredible optimization function, and it will optimize the heck out of whatever you create as the incentives. And so the key thing is, what do we actually want people to do? Do we want them to make sugary soft drinks and addictive ad platforms, or do we want to point them at something that actually increases human flourishing? So I think if we're able to collaborate on agreeing on what we actually want as a society, and then allow the competition force to take shape, and then people will come up with their own ideas about, oh, we could try this, or actually let's do this. Oh, I'm learning this from this experiment, etc. I think that's kind of the right way to approach it potentially. And then in terms of society versus society, or nation versus nation, etc., again, I think that ultimately we want to get to a place where people don't see themselves as as a monoculture thing, as a unitary thing, like I'm American and it's me versus everyone else. Like, I think over time, people will just start to care slightly less about where they happen to be from, and care more about the other areas of their personality that are, part of their digital ecosystem. People should realize that they themselves are the centers of 10, 20, dozens of different communities. And so within that community, you might want to collaborate, but, outside there might be competition, and that's okay. And so I think there's just different levels, there's different belonging that we have, and that's a really good thing. I think when people only consider themselves to be of one block, it's like, I'm Democrat or I'm Republican. That's where you get into trouble, because you're not. You're actually this beautiful diversity of many different communities and experiences that you've had, the people that you love. And so if you just associate with one thing, you start to get into trouble. So when you think about experimenting with society incubation today, how do you incorporate some of that insight that you have, or that vision, into what you set up for an experiment? Yeah. So when we create our Edge City experiments, we have people come and live alongside us for a month, right? And there's about 1,000 people over the course of the month that come through the doors. About 300 are there the full time. The rest, like a few days to a few weeks. So it's like a good number of people, right? And they are the basis, we're almost like bootstrapping the Edge City Networks Society, right? Which will exist. But right now, we need that like in-person connection for people to actually care about each other enough to want to create that thing that they will belong to or want to belong to. So how do we structure a space that actually takes into account the fact that people belong to many different
communities. They may have very different ideas about the world. They may actually be quite, antagonistic potentially. And the key thing is just to create a space where people feel comfortable to come as their full selves. So no one shows up and is like, I'm American, maybe some people do, but it's about creating the container where people realize like, oh wait, actually, I have all these other interests and all these other communities and all these other aspects of my personality that I belong to. And I'm going to use those as a way to connect with other people and actually deepen our relationships, right? And the competition aspect is interesting because we are, one of the experiments that is trying to do things. Other people are trying to do similar things, which are actually trying to actively encourage our competitors, quote unquote. We want other people to do pop-up villages because we want this whole movement to grow, right? So we open source everything we do at Edge City. And so you might think, well, why would you do that? What if some of your people go and actually spend time at this other village? And I'm like, yeah, go for it. Like learn, see what they have to say, run some experiments there, because then you can come back.
It's like going to the new world.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So go and get some cool ideas, because like we're not going to figure it all out, right? So again, back to this idea of emergence. The best ideas will come when there are many experiments being run, and we will benefit from them too, right? So that's where the competition and collaboration actually works, because yes, it's competitive. Yes, maybe we're losing someone who goes to somewhere else instead of us, but it's also collaborative because eventually they'll come back or they'll write an essay about their experience. We'll get a new idea and we'll actually improve ourselves.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
And this is, jets into my second factor question here, which is about education and society.
Yeah.
And how do you think about, is there like a minimum bar of education that is required in order to incubate something successful?
I think education is probably one of the most important things that we can invest in as a society. I think it has been often politicized for that reason, and actually potentially people have made decisions to actually lower the education of their populace in order to not have people, rise up against them or realize that they're being, unfairly treated. So, or certain subsets of the population. For a long time, women couldn't get an education. Obviously, for a long time in the US, African Americans couldn't get an education. So it's an incredibly important thing. It's an incredibly important tool of emancipation, of actually giving people agency to affect how their lives are governed. So that's like baseline importance of education, right? In terms of our experiments, I think about it more like, how can we be a place where we can incubate new ideas about what education can be like and should be like, right? I think it's pretty clear that the current education system isn't fit for purpose in the majority of the West. Like, it's kind of a 200, 250-year-old education model. It's made for industrial, society. It does a really good job of kind of churning out graduates who are good at taking tests, but it doesn't really, I can speak from my experience, I don't think I left with any kind of understanding of how to be a flourishing human being, right? I loved school. I did very well in school. It actually suited me well. I was like a math and economics nerd. But in retrospect, in my 20s, I actually had to de-school myself. This is an idea from Ivan Illich. I had to de-school myself because I realized that I had just become good at taking tests and just-in-time memorization, right? So anyway, point being, we need new education systems. We need innovation in that field. Where is that innovation going to come from? It doesn't seem like it's coming from the government. There are some private actors who are attempting, like startups and things like that. There are billionaires who are starting their own schools for their own kids and then kids of their friends. I think ultimately the entire field is already going through a pretty big reckoning. And with AI, it's just going to become like the current system just doesn't work. You know, I have friends getting master's degrees right now. They're just straight up chat GPTing their way through their experience.
It's crazy.
Like they're in the 1 or 2 year gap where professors have not caught up to what's happening. And, you know, and the tools are there and the tools are really good. So point is, we need new systems. Where are they going to come from? I think Edge City can be part of that. We are actively running experiments in how we educate our children, how we educate the adults, how we have like a lifelong learning experience. I'll tell you one story. We did an Edge City in South Africa. It was just a week. It was like kind of like a scouting trip essentially for potentially a bigger pop-up city there. We taught a school called Apex School. So Apex School started because they didn't have enough space in the kind of traditional classroom school system, but they had a wait list of about 1,000 kids. So what they thought was, okay, we're going to take the 100 kids that are next on the wait list, and we're just going to run an experiment. Otherwise, these kids would not be going to school. We're going to run an experiment. We're going to put them in a classroom. Every kid is going to get a Chromebook, which is donated. And we're going to use a software that's enabled with AI, but it's primarily like a curriculum software. And we're going to see how they learn. One teacher, 100 kids, as opposed to normally it's like one teacher, 30 kids, right? So it's way more scalable. And mostly they're learning from the laptop, not from the teacher. They started the year late, 5 months late into the year, and they ended with better results than the top class of the normal school. Ooh. And this was like a really good school.
Nice.
For that area. So they were like, wait, what? So they did it again, same results. They're basically showing that you can actually learn better, you can teach kids better using this new technology as compared to just the normal classroom method, which is crazy because no one in the US is thinking about this. There's some folks in Austin doing something similar, but it's like, it kind of has to happen in a place where there is a need because there are 1,000 kids not getting educated because there's just no capacity in the schools. So they had to innovate, right? South Africa is interesting for this because there is, you know, lots of innovation happening there, but there's also just deep divides, you know, economically. So you have the frontier tech being developed in Joburg and Cape Town, but you also have just incredible poverty where it needs to be used. So it's actually kind of a petri dish for this kind of thing, right? Anyway, that's the kind of thing that we want to help incubate and help grow.
That's super interesting. And so one thing that comes to mind here is I've been reading this book. I think we talked about this on the last call we had, which is The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio. And this, you know, it's hard to interpolate, I think, ephemeral experiments to multi-generational cycles, right? And so there's a chart in the book which shows the sort of the rising and falling of empires or countries. And the idea there is like education is the level of education of the society is very correlated to the rise or the decline of it, right? And so I wonder, what is the role of sustained education over many, many generations? And how do you keep it up at a pace that keeps up with technology? And like, there's a second part to that question, which is, you mentioned your friends who are getting masters that are basically, what I hear, outsourcing a lot of their thought, their critical thinking. Is it a lost cause to keep educating people, or should we actually just try and outsource our brains?
No. I think it's even more important now to be educating people. We need to be teaching people how to reason, how to think with the tools, with the machines. I do think something is lost, but I'm not kind of sentimental about it. When writing became a thing, philosophers of the time talked about how it's this horrible, you know, invention because no one's going to remember anything anymore. They're going to outsource their critical thinking, you know, or knowledge to the paper, to the tablet or whatever. Something similar will happen. We will get worse at remembering things because we just won't need to, in the same way that we're worse at directions because we have Google Maps. I think that's okay. I think the extension of our abilities is like makes that really worth it, and that's fine. We just need to change how we teach people. Right now, the idea of giving a student a laptop and saying, you know, what is the answer to this fact-based question is just silly, because they're just going to ChatGPT it or Google it or whatever, right? Similar now for essays, you can just create them on the spot.
Totally.
So one idea is, okay, all tests will be done with pen and paper. That seems insanely, you know, unoriginal to me. It's like, why don't we actually lean in and use these tools for what they're really good at, right? And actually create an environment that's similar to the work that people will be doing. You can just instantly spin up a new website, a new app, a new, you know, piece of art. That's incredible. Like, let's get kids doing that, like actually generating, you know. So yeah, when it comes to education, I'm kind of like, let's accelerate with tech. I think it's actually going to be really beautiful. I love learning. I love using these new tools to learn. I love learning new languages, even though that's probably going to be obsolete soon. So like, but AI is just incredible for it. Like, I can just have full-on conversations with ChatGPT advanced voice mode in German or Spanish or Russian or whatever, you know? Yeah. So it's pretty cool.
I completely agree. I'm touching back to your point on maps. So I think this is a really good and interesting focal point.
Yeah.
So we've outsourced our map reading abilities to computers, and we blindly follow directions. And you know, you have someone like actually my dad, when he drives, I was actually just on a road trip with my family.
Yeah.
And we're on Waze, and there's like traffic, you know, and he's questioning Waze. And I'm like, just don't, why would you question Waze? Like, it's obviously going to get you there faster than your own knowledge of the highways in these parts. So thinking 10 years ahead, what areas won't become Google Mapified per se, right?
Yeah.
Where you're saying, well, we still need to learn reasoning and things of that. But like, do you?
So one preface is that I think making any kind of prediction right now is like a complete fool's errand, because 100%. Literally 10 years from now is just going to be...
And that's why we're here.
That's why we're here. Yeah. But that said, I think that this way of thinking, this lens, this kind of Jeff Bezos, what doesn't change in 10 years is the right way of approaching it. And taking a step back and looking at society more broadly, like what won't change for humans? I think we're always going to want connection. We're always going to want fulfillment. We're always going to want like be in community. We're going to want respect from our peers and friendship, all of those things, right? That I don't think is ever going to go away. And that's good, right? And so how does that relate to this? Well, I think maybe education will go much more towards the experiential component and actually being in community and actually having an enabling environment that lets you learn something by doing it rather than just sitting in front of a textbook or a screen, right? There's an amazing learning theorist called Andy Matushak that we've had at Edge City, and he talks about this idea of enabling environments for learning, right? You can learn how to create renewable energy on, you know, from a textbook, or you can do what a group did last year at Edge Esmeralda, and they just built a solar powered A-frame and they powered our whole closing party using renewable energy. Wow. Which is, they came not knowing that they were going to do that, but they spent 2 weeks literally sawing wood, welding, attaching solar panels, actually learning how it works. And they had a goal that they had to hit, right? They had a deadline that they needed to meet. And it was just way more, it's just a much more interesting thing. Same thing, like you can read a book, you can read Paul Graham's essays, or you can just start a startup, right? And just go for it. So I think that maybe education just becomes more of that, you know? Doing, right? And so, okay, how do you do and learn the great books, the great classics? Well, maybe you still need to read. That's something I hope people don't lose. Maybe I'm old-fashioned like that. I still think it's important for people to be able to sit and read and actually concentrate and take in the text. But maybe there's like the added augmented reality component where you can actually you can read Plato and then you can talk to him. Or it's a Socratic thing where you're listening in to, you know, a teacher and a student, and you get to participate in that by, you know, seeing how the teacher instructs the student. And maybe there's a pause where when there's a question and you have to answer yourself. There's actually things already like this I think are incredibly powerful. So I think the future is bright for education. Can you imagine like a fully immersive environment where I'm sitting with Plato, or like us two are sitting with Napoleon and just talking about his ideas? It's going to be incredible. We just need to not get stuck in the current ways of doing things. In general, I think there are there's like two broad approaches. You can take the thing that currently exists and try and make it better, or you can just start with a fresh piece of paper, right? You can take a really old, robust code base and try to like get in the weeds, you know, or you can just like start a new project and just see an experiment, right? You can take 250 years of the American democratic system, or you could like try and start a little network society in the cloud and just run your governance experiments there, right? And so I think with education, it's something similar where I hope there are people thinking about the current system and how to improve it. Godspeed to them. But I think we should also have new ideas and new experiments that we try at the same time, and then we can combine our learnings.
It sounds like to me what you're saying, first of all, I completely agree. The ability to learn whatever you want has never been higher, and it will continue to be like even more powerful moving forward.
Right.
The need to do it, to me, is diminishing at a very quick rate. So like, do I need to learn about Plato and Socrates to stay alive and have a life? Like,
did you ever? Did you ever really need Plato to like stay alive?
Probably not those, but for instance, for me, in order to survive financially, I had to learn how to code. I had to learn these skills where in a world, a very far out world where you have super intelligent computers and abundance, do you actually need to learn anything in order to survive?
I think we're now kind of budging up on a bigger topic, which is what happens post-scarcity.
That's one of the fourth factors, actually. I can reframe the question, which is in a world of abundance, post-scarcity world, what is the role of a human in society?
Okay, I mean, that is the main question right now. I feel like I'll give you my view. I'm curious to hear yours.
Yeah.
I think that humans, I'm optimistic and I am team human, and I think we will figure it out. I think certain places will have a harder time figuring it out than others. First of all, let's just question the premise for a moment. Will we actually get to post-scarcity where humans don't have to do anything? I actually don't know if that's necessarily a truth, at least not in, let's say, like 10 years. Maybe we get actual super intelligent takeoff, and then we just have completely different things to think about and worry about. But let's say we don't, but we get to a point where like 80% of people have lost their jobs, and it obviously needs to be some refresh in the way society is structured and the social contract, etc. So I think it can be this incredibly beautiful, fun, cool thing where everyone actually just has the agency and the ability and the creativity to do whatever they want and to express themselves. And maybe there's still things that they have to do because we care about people applying themselves in some way. So we don't just get like a Wall-E world where everyone's like in their chair getting pumped full of dopamine. But the things that we do are actually creating art for each other, creating theater plays for each other. Maybe we're applying ourselves with the tools that we have, with the super intelligence, and trying to solve random obscure diseases because we really care about that, or we spent the weekend going really deep into a learning rabbit hole on some specific thing, you know? And I think that's actually an exciting world and something we should aim at. Something I joke about is, you know, I spend my time in New York and Berlin. people in the US like to, poo-poo Europe and say, oh, it's kind of falling behind. GDP hasn't grown in whatever many years. I think actually Berlin is almost like this magical land that's already in post-scarcity where like not actually, but it's ready for it.
Like psychologically.
Psychologically, Berlin is so ready for post-AGI or post-scarcity because they have already abstracted meaningfulness away from their job, right? I have friends that, this is like a gross generalization, just, bear with me. I have friends in Berlin that, they work a few nights at a bar. They have their like experimental drone heavy metal band that they're like, that's their focus, artistically. And then they make, ambient paintings or whatever. I don't know, some crazy stuff. They can just experiment, right? And I guarantee if someone was like, hey, we've switched on AGI and no one has to work again, they'd be like, okay, cool. And they just keep doing what they're doing, right?
It's amazing.
Right. Whereas I think like, and right now we can laugh about that, but I genuinely think we're about to go through an insane economic restructuring. It's already happening. We're starting to see how it's actually going to happen. We're starting to see the contours of it. Companies that did layoffs 3 years ago aren't hiring again, whereas maybe they would have otherwise. They're realizing that actually their middle managers can do the role that normally the early career analysts would do because they have, deep research and ChatGPT. So why would we hire that person, right? Is it just to create a pipeline of talent? Maybe we don't need it. So there's already graduates starting to graduate into a very hostile work environment. We're going to need to figure it out. And I think it's one of those, like, the American mind can't comprehend this, which is like, this country, it in many beautiful ways has been built by people who strive and who really want to push themselves in their work and find meaning through that. And that's about to shift a lot.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're going to need to have some kind of cultural reckoning around, well, what does it mean if you can't find a job? Are you a bad husband, wife, father, whatever? Or are you actually just a creative, artistic human who should be pursuing those things instead, right?
Yeah.
Most people don't have high agency jobs right now. That's the other thing. Like, we're so insanely privileged to be sitting here and talking about these big ideas.
Of course.
There's maybe 20-25% of society in the US that actually has like an agentic job. This is not to talk badly. Like, people can have beautiful, meaningful lives working a service job or at Walmart or whatever. Like, this is not disparaging that at all. But I'm pretty sure if you actually sat down with that person and said, hey, like, what kind of work do you want to be doing? They would maybe have other ideas than checkout clerk at Walmart, right? They probably have incredible prose within them, or like the ability to create amazing art, or like viral TikToks or whatever. I don't know, but like some creativity that can be unlocked there. And right now is just being suppressed by the economic system.
Yeah.
It's actually deeply sad that that's what's happening. And so hopefully that will change.
We see things, I think, pretty similarly. I think going back to a point that you made way earlier, which was like, humans have these natural inhibitions, some of which is to innovate. I also believe humans have a natural affinity to create and solve problems. And ultimately, I think that the quality of problem that you're solving in a lot of ways determines your well-being and your happiness. Totally. And what I mean by that is, if you look back very far before modern medicine, most humans are fighting for physical survival. We've flipped from a fight for physical survival to a fight for psychological survival. And in a lot of ways, we spend time distracting ourselves through things like work. People like us, like you said, are very lucky because I find so much joy in writing software and these types of, questions. When you don't have to do it, I think we get to a point where we are at the pinnacle of fighting for meaning. And it makes me think of this Disney movie called Soul. I don't know if you've seen that, but where you have to find your spark. If we're calling out for people to run experiments or research or insight, it's like, how do you cultivate places where people can find their spark?
I think the ironic truth about human nature is that we need some adversity to be up against. And if everything is set for you, it's actually incredibly debilitating. I think some people take that too far and they think, well, that's why, actually everything in society is great, because if someone really wanted to progress through the ranks, they would just apply themselves harder and work harder. And it's like, no, actually social mobility is kind of a myth in the last 30 years in the US and whatever. But like, ultimately some adversity is important. I have this like incredible psychological shield because I grew up very poor. I remember what that's like. I remember not having enough food. I remember not having electricity or running water. So like my shift of circumstance from that to suddenly growing up like lower middle class in London was so vast that if I'm ever remotely sad, I can just remember that and be like, oh, I'm actually probably one of the luckiest people in the world, purely from life circumstance, right? My half brother, who's now 18, so he's 13 years younger than me, he didn't have that. He grew up squarely middle class and he's amazing. He has so many beautiful characteristics that I don't have, but like he has a different view on the world, right? He's like, when I was a teenager and he was young, I'm kind of ashamed of it, but like I felt he was super spoiled. And I was like, you don't know how lucky you are. Just be grateful for what you have, And so I think there is something there around that is relevant to what we're talking about here, which is I don't want people to have to work 3 jobs as a single mother just to, make it work for their kids. That's horrible. And the fact that there's millions of people in similar positions to that in the richest country in the world is just insane to me. But so we need to fix that, right? But as we move into post AI, where like a majority of the economic value is done by automated systems and robots and things like that, we need to be aware that, we still need to be smart about how we structure things so that people feel like they have a project, like they have something to occupy themselves with, right?
Yes.
Like I have a very simple rubric for what you call well-being. I think of as human flourishing, as like the thing to optimize for, the thing to maximize.
Cool.
And when I think about human flourishing, there's really 3 things for a human to flourish. There's relationships, projects, and experiences. This is something I got from this guy, Brink Lindsay. He works at a think tank in DC, very deep thinker. But essentially, relationships, it's obvious. It's the people we surround ourselves with, the community, etc. Projects, it's the things that we apply ourselves to. And ideally, they are at the limit of our ability so that we feel like we're constantly stretching ourselves, It might be, I really want to run a marathon, and that's like the thing that I'm aiming myself at, or I really want to get good at chess. It doesn't matter that there's a machine that was better than I will ever be at chess. It's still something I can strive for, right? And then experiences like novelty, trying new things, traveling, etc. And I think that there is a way that we can optimize for these things without, but still get the benefits of, post-scarcity, powerful AI.
You bring up a great point. It doesn't matter if you're not the best thing. And I agree with that too. For instance, like I love playing basketball. Yeah. Am I ever going to go to the NBA? No.
Highly unlikely.
No, I, like basically zero. The NBA would have to change a lot. You know what I mean? So, and that's okay. And it's funny because I play every Saturday with a group of guys and I'd say on the lower end of the skill spectrum. There's a very good group of players played in college. And I'll leave and be like, oh, I need to get better.
Yes.
I'm still never going to go to the NBA.
Doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter. Like, I don't need to be the funniest human in the world. I just care that my 10 friends find me funny and my partner finds me funny, right? And she does, and it's the best thing ever. And like, we laugh around so much. I don't need to be the greatest comedian. I get so much joy, so much meaning from making her laugh, from making my brother laugh or my family, or just having good experiences with them. I think this is also the messed up thing about our current system, which is like, think about the most meaningful experiences you've had in the last 6 months, right? How many of them had an impact on the GDP of this country or any other country?
Not much.
Like for me, like barely any. Maybe building the thing that, you know, but really it's like taking a walk at sunset with my mom and having a meaningful conversation with her. Even just like waking up and noticing the light and just being like, wow, this is so cool. When I think about meaningfulness, it's experiences where you want to linger. It's experiences that you wouldn't outsource to your EA. Like I wouldn't outsource lying there, noticing the light enter my bedroom, right? That's something I want to just spend time in and actually notice and be with. And so what impact does that have on the key metric that we care about in society? Absolutely zero.
Interesting.
But it's still very important to me. And so if we can start to maybe shift our cultural understanding and get people to care much more about like the things that give them meaning and meaningfulness, right? Things they value rather than the value they create. So that's, I think, a thing that will have to shift. And that happens through culture. That happens through podcasts and music and art and people talking about it on Instagram and people being at Edge City and actually finding ways to like, you know, create tech around it and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
wow. That for me, I love competing against myself. Right. So I love timing a mile run and I'm like pissed when I'm like, why didn't I beat my last score? Optimizing biometrics, optimizing. And so I do wonder how those things kind of contradict each other, where there's people who don't have that drive to just, it sounds like you wake up, you're like, this is beautiful and this is what's great.
Sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, I have the neurosis of just like, okay, all right, time to get up and go. Like I like driving. I like competing. I like to have agency and like impart my, you know, activity on the world for sure. It's about finding that balance. Like one of the things I find most interesting is the contradiction between the, you know, finding peace, finding mental equanimity, being okay with the present moment in all of its, you know, in all of the ways that it shows up, and still wanting to change things and wanting to strive and wanting to be ambitious in your own way. I think that contrast is very interesting. It's something everyone has to grapple with in some way. Like I never had trouble with the drive part. That's pre-installed. I've had to learn the equanimity part, right? I don't think the drive is ever going away and I don't want it to. I just want to make sure that I take those moments of peace to make sure that I'm driving in the right direction. Because otherwise you could just keep going and realize 5 years later, like, wait, I think maybe I was doing the wrong thing. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that, because actually taking time to sit still and not do, I feel like for me, I've wasted a lot of time from just filling time and being like, go, go, go. I have an idea for a project. Oh, I'm going to start coding it. Where it's like, if I had maybe planned a little bit more, given it a little bit more time, I would have realized that wasn't maybe a great idea. I've spent 6 months working on a project that I end up being like, this isn't it. And I don't even put it out. So it is a tough duality. It does go to show, and I think about this a lot with deeply meditative people. And I don't know enough about monks, I would say, but like, I don't know if you've followed these folks like Jonathan and the jhanas and these like different meditation teachers and practices where these folks are like, oh, at any time I can, at the snap of a finger, have the most perpetual joy, any problem that I could possibly experience. And I'm like, why do you then want to reproduce or do anything?
So a lot of monks, I think now I know some monks, which is fun. I met a few in Bhutan when I was there, and they're doing great. Like, you know, we don't need to worry about the monks. Like they figure out food for themselves. You know, they're actually very active. They sometimes will farm and actually like do other things apart from being a monk. Also, for many people, being a monk is something they kind of, again, depends on the like lineage and whatever, but it's something they'll do for a few years and maybe come out of it again. So I think generally more folks who are on that path, or at least aware, like I'm thinking of Buddhism in this case, aware of those ideas is like probably a good thing.
Yeah.
I think the jhanas is very interesting because I haven't done the retreat yet. I've tried a couple of the meditations. It's really cool stuff. It's very powerful, but it's also so Silicon Valley. It's like, it's like, oh, it turns out there's actually a shortcut to enlightenment if you do these X steps. And,
So
you know,
funny.
it's
That's
just
such
like,
an interesting framing.
and, you know, you have all these kind of high powered CEOs and like people at the big AI labs going to do these retreats. Cause it's like, well, I'm not going to do this 6 months in the Himalayas, but I do have 6 days in upstate California, you know, like
Right,
I can squeeze that in. Or like I did a 1-day retreat in New York recently, and it was so funny because I was in my New York state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
I was very like go. I had meetings, and we left the retreat. My girlfriend went and did a Pilates class. I went and had a meeting, and afterwards we met up and we were like, oh my God, we've been in New York too long, because it's just the most perfect thing of like, oh yeah, we did our meditation retreat with Henry Schuckman. It was amazing. But then we have meetings to go to.
Like right after.
Yeah. Not
So
even
fun.
time to like, you know, process. So anyway, I'm definitely guilty of a lot of these dissonances and kind of two ways of looking at things. But I think in general, it's a net good thing. You know, these ideas are thousands of years old, and they're starting to get a lot of traction outside of just the places where they've been traditionally practiced. I think that's great. I think one of the interesting experiments we'll see is, for example, in Bhutan, they're building a new city called the Gilefu Mindfulness City. And the idea is to create kind of a modern Asian metropolis with Buddhist roots. And Bhutan is a small country, but it's right between India and China. It's, you know, the region of the world around it has something like 4 billion people. So there's definitely space for a new city. There's, you know, room for a new city. I think it can do hopefully really well. The question is, can you marry the innovation, kind of like the capitalist growth mindset, with kind of like a core mindfulness Buddhist value set? I think if anyone can do it, they can. It's like a 99% Buddhist country, bunch of monks there, wonderful
So
people.
interesting.
Yeah, they measure gross national happiness instead of GDP. So
Wow.
yeah, it's ostensibly the happiest country in the world. So anyway, there's interesting experiments being run in this area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. And, you know, I think to me, I've grappled with the duality and found like a place that gives me peace,
Great.
which is that I think a lot of the times you can do ambition out of intentionality versus do it out of distraction or fear or running away from something else or necessity, right? Where a lot of times I'll keep working because I'm like, I need to make sure my family will survive, and I need to make money, and I need to do all these things. And that causes me to like thoughts to creep up and subconsciously work on things that maybe isn't really what I want to do. Whereas like if you've found peace and you are practicing these like meditations and you are, what's a good way to describe this? Like you are not being controlled by your own subconscious thought to go and work and do these things. Rather, you have decided consciously, because I don't need to do anything, this is what I want to do. Then you can still do ambition, but it's just you decided to. It wasn't that it's out of necessity.
Totally.
Yeah.
Or not even necessity, just you've decided to the extent you can without being influenced by kind of mimetic desire or the people around you. I suffered from this so badly, where after I graduated from university, the first 2 or 3 things I did, I think were deeply informed by my peer group. So I studied math, econ, computer science. The people around me were going into consulting and investment banking. So I went into investment banking. Such a bad idea. I left as soon as I could. I cut my contract short. It just wasn't for me. But again, I had to de-school myself.
Right.
I was part of the system. It had kind of, my mind had been in the context for so long of just doing the thing that people, you know, having the high status thing be set for you. After that, I joined a startup, helped grow. It was an incredible experience. But then I was like, okay, obviously I want to be a founder, right? That's like what it means to live a good life. And then, you know, I actually realized, wait, I want to, you know, started my startup, whatever, like went pretty well. Then I was like, okay, I want to be a VC because that actually suits me better. And I was like getting closer and closer and closer, right? Ran a VC fund for a bit. It went well. It was good. Like had a good time with it. And then I get to this event called Zuzalu, like 2-month pop-up village that Vitalik Buterin started with a few other folks, including my now co-founder, Janine. And I'm there for a few weeks. I'm organizing the AI track. And I just have this like profound personal experience. And afterwards I'm sitting at it, I'm like, what actually just happened? Like, why was that so good? Why was it so meaningful? And I think it's because I was in this environment where all these different sides of me were able to express themselves. So there's obviously the intellectual side. I'm hosting panels and listening to talks and whatever. But there was also the playful side. Like we were doing cold plunges in the ocean and kind of meeting new people, running around. There's the community side. There was the artistic side. I was DJing. And so it was like so holistic and so fun and so fully, you know, in accordance with my plurality as a person. I was like, man, this is what I want to be doing like all the time. Right. And so that's how eventually that was the seed of what became Edge City. But I want to create that experience for other people. I think people will create better technology out of that space because they're actually fulfilled. And so we'll incubate better things, better institutions, better education systems, better startups. Anyway, not to like loop it back to what I'm doing, but I think there's something interesting there, you know?
No, 100%. And, you know, one of the goals of this podcast, at least in my mind, like a KPI that I have for myself is to walk away from each episode with kind of uncovering a unique insight for a researcher, an entrepreneur, and an investor. And so I wonder and I've been thinking about this the whole time, like what insight can we kind of pull out? And it's like, at least, and I'm very curious to hear what you have to say. That one thing that's coming to mind for me is like, you found a lot of meaning in that time as Zuzalu, and that allowed you to progress forward and do something that you love doing. That sounds like you probably do even in a post-scarcity society, right? Like it's just so. What might be unique insights that if you're thinking about researching or building for the future, what are some important areas that you could dive into right now? For instance, like a startup for helping people find meaning, right? Is that so? Like your take is Edge City, right? What are some other ways that you might be able to do that?
I really think you can look at the idea of kind of the tippy top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs of like self-actualization and then kind of the community aspect of it, and just see, okay, what can we create that will enable people to, you know, reach those things. And so for me, it's about creating the environments where, you know, those things can be incubated. I think for other capable people, it might be focusing on the education component of it. Or I think, for example, governance is like a deeply underexplored area that we need to be spending way more time on, especially how can we actually use AI and the latest tools to enable people to have more agency over their lives and their communities. I think actually an underexplored area of increasing human flourishing is building new cities and building new towns. Kind of want more people to be thinking about that because it's very difficult, but it's actually doable. Like every town that exists was at some point a new town, and we've kind of stopped doing that. but actually cities can be an engine of incredible growth and incredible new ideas and new ways of doing things. And so we have these new blank slates that we can use and actually try. So I kind of encourage more people to do that. But maybe the first thing that someone can do is literally just like steal our playbook. Like look at Edge City, look at the things we put out and just try doing your own version and see how it goes. Like gather your group of 500 people or whatever somewhere around the world with your focus area, your thing that you really want to see in the world. Gather the best 500 people to explore that with you over the course of a month or two, and then report back and like, you know, let's talk about it. Let's see what you learned so that we can, you know, improve everything that we're doing together. Yeah.
I think we're ready to transition to the third phase here of the conversation.
Yeah.
So last activity here for us is what I would call collaborative society design, hypothetically.
Okay. Cool.
So I'm gonna lay out a scenario for you, and let's try and build a society. So the hypothetical scenario is we've been tasked to develop Mars's first society, and we only have one shot at it for whatever reason. we have the technology to get us there, to take a good amount of people with us, supplies, and we need to, I would say we have two KPIs. One is about human flourishing, according to your definition. So we want to maximize human flourishing on Mars. Yeah. We also want to keep everyone, like we want to keep it alive and going and repopulate and make Mars a viable alternative to Earth. Yeah. So let's think about where we start. Who are we bringing?
Well, okay, we would need the consenting, obviously. So it's going to be people who care about being at the frontier, care about the adventure of it, right? It's interesting because instantly my mind goes to the populating of North America by immigrants and emigrants, like people leaving some situation that they did not vibe with, and going to somewhere new. Those initial 100 years were extremely difficult. A lot of the early settlements didn't make it. So you need a population that's interested in that. And ideally you want folks who are hardy, they can build, they're scientists, they're down for the adventure, they're down to experiment. And I think you want probably a diversity of people within the bounds of a community that can actually, you know, get along. Sure. And so probably they need to all speak the same language. Okay. I guess default would be English. Probably you want like a variety of skill sets.
And how many people are we looking for?
Well, how big are our spaceships? Like how
we can take a good amount of people. I would say no more than, let's call it 5,000 even. Okay. Yeah, it's like a space blimp.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, okay, love the blimp. I think 5,000 would be the right number. Okay.
If you could take more, would you?
I think maybe early on, that's like perfect.
How do you know?
Okay, so Dunbar is a sociologist. You have famous Dunbar's number. Turns out there's actually many Dunbar's numbers. 150 is the one we think about normally, of like, you know, the number of people that you can
be friends with,
have a relationship with, whatever. Actually, it goes up and down. So I think there's something around the 50-person mark, which is really kind of like close, you know, much closer. And then there's 15 people, which is really like your friends and family, the people you rely on. 5, I can't remember the exact numbers, but they go in the other direction as well. And I think there's something around the 5,000 people mark, which is still governable as a collection of people. Because once you start to get above that, then you start to really get, you know, fractured societies and different groups forming, etc. Obviously, you'll still have some of that, but I think that's probably a good amount of people that you can have, you know, let's say 1 or 2 sizable settlements. Probably you want 2 or maybe even 3, kind of like the early US again, where you had, you know, the early different attempts at creating towns and settlements. You actually want some diversity there, maybe some gentle competition, but obviously collaboration as well, just so people can try different things of how do we survive in this new environment.
Super interesting. Okay, so we're flying 5,000 people out. We'll get back to the recruiting question in a moment, but we have 5,000 people that we think they speak English, they're aligned. What about age range?
That's a really good question. Let's think. Okay, so we probably don't want people who are, on death's doorstep.
Right.
Like, so we probably want to have some age limit. I think you probably also don't want to have complete newborns yet. I'd say my instinct would be something like from teenagers to, people in their 40s.
Okay.
I'd say the people in their 40s, I mean, you start to get really into like the nitty gritty of society, but like, ideally it's majority people that can repopulate.
Yeah. No, we got to get into the nitty gritty. Yeah.
So it's like primarily people, let's say in their 20s and like early 30s, people that can reproduce, repopulate, but you also want some elders who have like experience in the kinds of things that will be important. And by elders, I mean people in their 40s, let's say, who have, a couple decades of experience in engineering or in science or in the who are like medical doctors who can, speak to the oracle of ChatGPT, but then actually like do the surgery that's needed. Maybe we don't quite have robot surgeons yet. Ideally, we have some robots, by the way, in this.
Okay. Yeah. No, we can bring robots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
We're pretty far out into the future.
Okay. So we have some humanoid robots that can do like the heavy lifting, that could do some of the outdoor tasks, let's say.
Okay. So basically your assumption there is intellectual capital is more valuable than physical labor.
That would be my sense of it.
Okay.
In this, near future sci-fi reality where we have, functional robots and we have the power source for them in some way that they can actually do a lot of the, manual labor.
Yeah. Just thinking about my weightlifting friends are going to be not happy about
No,
this.
I mean, they've been training the wrong skill. Although I guess the knowledge work people also have. So
Yeah. And would we take couples? Like, or are we trying to have people meet there?
Such a good question. I'm trying to think, what sources of learning do we have that we can pull on? So there was an experiment in the late 80s, early 90s called Biosphere 2, where they put 8 people into a completely sealed biosphere in Arizona. And it was this like huge geodesic dome and then kind of a collection of indoor environments, essentially. They had different ecosystems. They had like the desert ecosystem and the jungle one, and they had to grow all their own food. And the goal was that they had to be in there for 2 years, 24 months. They actually made it to 18 months. And the reason that they failed was quite interesting, which is it ended up being kind of a issue of governance, because what happened was that there had been some miscalculation, and they didn't realize that if they grew, the slightly less potatoes than they were growing, there would actually be less oxygen. And so slowly the oxygen level was decreasing in the biosphere.
Oh, wow.
And so people were starting to like get a little bit slower in their mind, like argue a little bit more and things like this.
Wow, yeah.
And there were 2 camps. One that wanted to just open the door and close it again really quickly to kind of readjust the level of oxygen in the biosphere. And the other felt that that was cheating, and that actually they should try and do some kind of last Hail Mary with the equipment that they had. And in the end, they couldn't agree, and the whole thing kind of collapsed, and they had to exit the biosphere, and that was it. People saw it as this big failure because they didn't reach the 24-month mark. I'm like, they made it 18 months. That's
good.
Insanely impressive for what that was. But the point is, you actually need people who, you must need like psychologists. You need people who, or you need to involve psychologists in the process to understand like, how are people going to act in adverse situations, right? Let's say the oxygen is decreasing slowly in the Mars biosphere. Like, you probably need governance systems that will allow you to deal with that kind of thing, which I guess we'll get to governance in a second. In terms of couples, my guess is you probably want a bit of both, but maybe lean a bit more towards people that are already in stable relationships and that are honestly just consenting to have lots of babies, right? Not everyone's in that kind of relationship.
Right. We can put that in some of the recruitment material,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. You want people that are down for the mission, and that's going to mean some hardship. It's going to mean lots of procreating. It's going to mean, you know, I think you probably want to avoid drama as much as possible. So, you know, as much as it's great that people in California and New York or wherever, Berlin, are experimenting with like polyamory and stuff, I think you probably want to like not have too much of that. You kind of just want solid, straight line values that reflect the general values of the time. I don't think you want to stray too much and start to impose any kind of, you know, strict moral code or whatever.
Okay.
Just so people are in, there's going to be so many new and uncomfortable things that let's just make sure the like societal code is something they're used to.
Oh, this is interesting. It sounds like where you're kind of gravitating towards is there's like clear, distinct roles. You've named the elders, who are not that elderly, actually.
Yeah.
There's the populators, who their job is to then there's this third class of maybe knowledge people. There's also psychologists who can help deal with conflict. There's that. Now we're kind of getting into governance.
Yeah.
So would you start this as a democracy or like a benevolent dictator? Like, you've been tasked with this job with me, and
oh my God,
we can recruit people in whatever way we want. So we can recruit people and let them know that it's going to be a benevolent dictatorship, which might be good or bad, or we start it off and let it be more emergent. Yeah.
What would work well and what would actually take into account all of the things that we've learned about governance, right? I think ultimately with an endeavor like this, you do need strong leadership, but you need strong leadership that is extremely competent and has executive power, but also there are checks and balances so that someone doesn't go completely crazy in that position and try and take over the whole thing. And then it just becomes a cult that serves this one person, right? So I think actually, you know, the founding fathers of the US were really thoughtful about this stuff. By the way, mostly in their like early 20s. So younger than I am now, and like actually extremely smart, well-read people, right? So there's something there where actually maybe you kind of wanted to lean more young so that they have really interesting new ideas about how to do things. But they understood the idea of checks and balances and how this can actually be a very, like, this is a very important thing, right? Executive branch, judicial. I think you'd want to have something like that here as well, where maybe it's like every 1 year or 2 years, and maybe it's a compressed timeline, there's some referendum on, okay, is the person who's ultimately in charge actually the right person? But then I think you want also higher bandwidth democracy, right? Like people having a say in their little pocket or their little community. Although now that I think about it, a lot of these ideas are kind of, this is really interesting exercise, because a lot of these ideas we talk about are kind of fun, nice to have things in the current world. I'm pretty sure if you're on Mars, you kind of want just like, yes, there's checks and balances, but then, you know, there's a leader and you fall in line and you just like do what the executive says.
Yeah, you know, I like your idea of having actually 3 camps. And there's something there with governance where it's like it's like the national level, but also the state level, where you can experiment with different things within them. Maybe you can leave and come back, and maybe there's some way that they can collude to kind of do, you know.
It's like you have written into the Constitution that someone can exit their little camp and go to another one. Maybe there's a slight switching cost so that people still feel the need to, try and make it work. But if things really aren't working, if one of them becomes dictatorial, maybe there's a way, there's 100% a guaranteed way written into the Constitution to exit.
It's so interesting because like earlier you were talking about, oh, well, we should make it really easy to come and go from societies. And now we're talking about like, actually to form good societies, we need some level of allegiance to them.
Well, this is the classic thing of exit versus voice, right? This is this Albert Hirschman idea where either you stay in the situation you're in and you use your voice, your kind of political power to try to change it, or you exit and you try to move to a different situation, and kind of that's how you show your, like, the fact that you don't like what's going on, right? I think a lot of folks in the more libertarian camp and kind of the network state camp, they really focus on exit. They want everyone to be able to move around as they see fit. And if you really don't like your network state and if it's becoming despotic, you can always exit and go somewhere else. And that's how you maintain your, safety and your human rights. I think that's unfortunately very difficult to actually implement in practice. And also, completely free exit is not what you want, because, like, for example, if you're married and you start to have a little bit of difficulty, you don't want to just be like, all right, on to the next one, I'm going to start dating on Tinder. Like, you actually want to really invest in the relationship and make it work. So in our Mars context, you want people to try and make their thing work.
The downstream incentive is to keep trying and persisting, where if you have to swim upstream, you can, but there's more friction.
Right.
Okay.
Like, if you just came to the US in the 1600s, it's really difficult to go back, right? There's not really like an easy exit. So you're just going to have to make it work.
That's interesting. It's like, how important is that in, America working?
Totally.
But we have only a couple minutes left here. And the last question that I have is a good one to end it with, I think.
Okay.
But we have the option now to bring the artificial superintelligence with us, right?
Yeah.
So it exists, right? And the only caveat here is it seems aligned. It's never done anything to harm us, but we don't know if we don't have 100% clarity.
Right.
Do we bring it? And if we do, what capacity do we use it, or do we leave it?
Okay. So my initial thought is that it could be interesting to treat the Mars colony as the place where artificial superintelligence doesn't exist, and then the Mars colony almost becomes like the new version of the Amish, where it's kind of it's high tech, but it's stuck at a certain period of technology that on Earth ASI just changes everything. It's completely, if ASI actually exists, then things will happen. More progress will happen in 5 years than has ever happened in the history of humanity, right? So Earth will just become its own kind of incredible, hopefully, thing. Maybe humans will align that actually the Mars expedition is really a time capsule. It's not an expansion. It's our way of preserving a certain way of life, the way of life that existed in 2030, that we just want to make sure that gets frozen in time. So I think that's actually quite interesting to explore.
That is. But how do you know that it won't progress on its own in those, like, I guess this is a whole nother conversation, but like, if we always are going to inevitably converge on AI because it's an evolutionary like thing, do we end up just getting there anyways?
It's a cultural thing.
Yeah.
Like the Amish could invent,
I guess that's true.
Electricity. So
we
it's right there.
We have to screen for this.
If we wanted to do that, we could.
Okay. Okay.
I think in the scenario where we bring ASI with us, that also is helpful, because ASI will probably have evolutionary mechanics of its own. There is a world where we bring it to Mars, and then that's the fork in the ASI evolutionary tree, and the Mars ASI actually becomes different to the one on Earth.
Right.
And realistically, I think ASI will actually be millions of agents all working in concert. So there's going to be evolutionary dynamics in every direction. but actually maybe that could be healthy, right? And then we send a few to like, you know, other parts of the solar system, or eventually, hopefully outside of our solar system to like the nearest stars and the inhabitable planets there. So yeah, I mean, I think once we get to the level of making those decisions, my instinct is just like, you know what, full send. Let's just do it. Like,
I'm kind of with
bring
you.
the robots, bring the AI. Let's just like make Mars work for us, and then, you know, on to the next one.
Well, I think that's a great place to park it here. We've reached time.
Good.
Timour, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for
having me. It was a very interesting conversation. Well, I wish we had more time to dig into the Mars Society, but maybe for another time. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
If you want to learn more about Timour's work or Edge City, be sure to follow him on X at TimourXYZ. To join the conversation, drop a comment, leave a review, or follow me directly on X. If you like what we're doing, be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in.